myself. So welcome to the very first scrutiny meeting of the new Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee. And a little bit further on into the agenda, Dan will talk us through the terms of reference and how this particular committee came about. So if we take the agenda as it is, but just first of all, if I can just remind you that this is a public meeting and it will be streamed live on YouTube. Now, I think we're all getting quite familiar with Teams meetings, but where possible, please, if you can avoid background noise and interference by muting your microphone when not speaking. Now, I don't know how Phil's going to do this in terms of the raising your hand facility if you wish to speak. I think you might just have to butt in if you've got no chat facility at all on your screen, Phil. Okay, so if we move on to the agenda then, we have apologies for absence, Tanya. Okay, thank you. We haven't received any, I can't see Councillor Sohal from Walsall on the call yet, but we haven't had apologies, have we, from him? No, okay. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so declarations of interest. If I can just remind members of the need to disclose any pecuniary interests where you're having an item being discussed during the course of the meeting. And in addition, the receipt of any gift or hospitality should be declared where the value is thought to have exceeded £25 in gift or £40 hospitality. So moving swiftly on to item 3, because we're a brand new committee and it'll be the first meeting for everybody of this particular committee.
Councillor
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Councillor Taylor here.
Hello, Jackie.
Hello, sorry to interrupt you there. I think it's pertinent for me to disclose that I'm one of the board members for West Midlands Rail.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to actually say that at this point. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
I also, Ian Kettle speaking. I'm also on the West Midlands Rail Board with Jackie, but it's non-pecuniary, so. That's why I didn't declare it. So I don't think it mattered, Jackie, to be honest with you, as it was non-pecuniary.
Could I it's Councillor Phil Bateman.
Hello, Phil.
Just for clarity, I'm on the advisory board of the Canal and River Trust. It's a non-pecuniary position, but just to make sure that it gets logged in, and I am a former employee of West Midlands Travel. I've retired and been gone for some time now, but you know, it's important that people who we talk with know the background, just to be absolutely clear about the diligence of our scrutiny. Okie doke.
Lovely, thank you. Anybody else before we move on? No, I'm not seeing any other hands indicating. Okay, thank you. So if we move on then to welcome and introductions, I think it feels a little bit like most members probably worthwhile if we just do a quick round of introductions, including officers, please, so we're all clear on who's on the call. So I'm Councillor Baton and I'm here representing the ABCA, which is the Association of Black Country Authorities, and I'm Vice Chair of the Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So if we move on then, please. We take members first. So Councillor Bateman, do you want to start?
Yeah, Councillor Phil Bateman, City of Wolverhampton Council, but has to be part of the scrutiny meeting. A background in in public transport, both in terms of elected members and also a background in professional work, having started on the railway in 1965. It seems a long time ago now. Basically that I've declared my interest in terms of the Canal and River Trust Advisory, West Midlands Advisory Board. I don't think there's anything else really that I can add. Oh, except I'm the member for Wensfield North, and without their support, I wouldn't be doing any of it. So just to flag up Wensfield, wonderful Wensfield.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bateman. Councillor Clements.
Thanks, Kathy, and hello, everybody. I'm Liz Clements. I'm a ward councillor for Bourneville and Cotteridge in Birmingham, and I'm also the chair of the council's Sustainability and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee, a role which I've held since May 2018. So very much an interested layperson and member interest on transport, but a frequent user of bus and rail, and also a fair weather cyclist and pedestrian. So very happy to be here.
Thanks, Councillor Clements, and we're very happy to have you. Councillor Taylor.
Well, I too am delighted to be here this morning. I'm Councillor Jackie Taylor. I'm councillor to a ward called Greets Green and Ling in Sandwell, and also Cabinet Member for Sustainable Transport Sandwell. So thanks for having me back.
Pleasure. Yeah, Councillor Ali.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for having me in this scrutiny board. I'm the councillor for Coventry City Council, Charles Moore Ward, and a Deputy Cabinet for Public Health and Sport.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I can't yet see Councillor Sohal on the call, so we'll move on then to Councillor Kettle, who is substituting for Councillor Rogers.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Kettle, elected member for Pedmore and Stourbridge East, and Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Economic Development on Dudley Council.
Thank you, Councillor Kettle. So if we move then on to officers, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Dan Essex. I'm the Governance Services Manager, which has responsibility for overseeing the Democratic Services team and also the scrutiny function within the combined authority.
Thank you. Lindsay.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. So I'm Lindsay Roberts, the Scrutiny Officer for the West Midlands Combined Authority, responsible for the scrutiny function.
Thank you. David.
Hello, thank you, Chair. I'm David Harris. I'm Transport Strategy and Place Manager within the Policy, Strategy and Innovation Directorate at Transport for West Midlands.
Thank you. Adam.
Skip the technology. So, morning, everyone. So, Adam Harrison. So, I work with David's team within TFWM's Policy, Strategy and Innovation Directorate.
Thank you. Anne.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Anne Shaw. I'm the Director of Network Resilience at Transport for West Midlands, and I'm here today to talk about the schools restart.
Thank you very much. And the only other name I can see, John Hayes.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Good morning all. So I'm John Hayes, Head of Bus at Transport for West Midlands. Job does what it says on the tin, but here today to talk to you about the schools restart also.
Lovely. Have I missed anybody? Just shout up if I've missed you off. No? Okay, that's fine.
Chair, Tanya would be too modest to say that I missed it.
Tanya, I'm so sorry. I'm looking down the chat bar and I can't see your name down there. So I apologise profusely. Thank you. And now I'm going to put you on the spot again. Are we Corat? No, it's fine. Lovely. Thank you very much. I have to say that's a really pleasing thing for me, that the first meeting of this committee is quorate, considering we struggle greatly to get a quorum for the main overview and scrutiny. So thank you everybody for making the time to attend this morning. So if we move then further onto the agenda and item number 4, and that is the appointment of vice chair. We need to appoint a vice chair for this subcommittee for this municipal year. Dan, do you want to talk us through the requirements of that, please?
Yes, happy to, Chair. So, as you've said, whilst your appointment as chair of the subcommittee is within the gift of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, it's for this subcommittee itself to choose its vice chair. The only requirement that I would particularly stress is that it is a condition of overview and scrutiny within the combined authority that, and this is set out in legislation, so we have no local discretion, but the chair of the scrutiny meeting or meetings must come from a different party than the party that the mayor represents. So obviously Andy Street as mayor is a Conservative councillor, so that will mean both Overview and Scrutiny Committee and this subcommittee must not have a Conservative chair. So other than that requirement, obviously the responsibility for the vice chair would be to step in and cover your responsibilities were you not available. So as that person may be called upon to chair this meeting, they can't actually be a Conservative councillor. So other than that, it's for the committee to appoint its own vice chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I think the only additional thing I'd like to add into that is kind of, apart from stepping in to chair the committee if I was unable to do that, the other responsibilities would be to attend the pre-meeting briefing sessions, the agenda setting session, and if this committee decided to undertake a deep dive into a particular topic, then there may be a requirement for the vice chair to chair that particular meeting. So on that basis then, I throw it open for nominations from the floor from the relevant Labour councillors. So do I have a nomination, please? Jackie, Taylor?
Yeah, Kathy, you know that I'm the kind of politician that talks a lot about equality and diversity. And so what I would like to say at this moment in time is I'd like to see a man in that position, as you are female as chair.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that contribution. Do I see any nominations?
Kathy?
Yeah.
Can I nominate Councillor Bateman if he's willing to consider the role?
Councillor Bateman?
I'm hiding under a cushion at the moment. But, you know, I will do it, Kathy.
Okay, thank you.
But you know, I will do it because of what's been said up to yet. But I was not seeking the role. Let me just make that point to you. I was not seeking the role.
Well, these nominations tend to happen, in my experience, if you either miss a meeting or you've gone to the toilet during a meeting and you get nominated for something. So there you go. Thank you very much anyway. Okay, so can I have a seconder for Councillor Bateman?
I'll second, Councillor.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that, I think, formally appoints Councillor Bateman to the role of Vice Chair for this municipal year. So if we move on then to item number 5, and Dan and Lindsay and David Harris are just going to take us through, just because this may be a new committee, it may be a new thing for some of you to be seeing. So just to have an understanding of the purpose of the combined authority, of the transport powers within that, just so we all are very clear on what it is we're scrutinising and our understanding around that. So if I can hand over to Dan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it'll be me to start off, and then I'll bring others in as we go along. And I think Tanya emailed the presentation slides around to you at the back end of last week, but I'll bring them up on the screen and then work them through. But as I say, you'll have the copies within your pack if it's easier to see them that way. So if I share my screen, and through the wonders of technology, that should be coming up in front of you. So what I'm going to talk about to start this off is the combined authority itself, the organisation, how it was set up, ways of working, and how scrutiny works. Obviously, as you said, Chair, that some members will be very familiar with this, and if I could just ask those members to bear with me for 10 minutes or so. There will be some members who are new to this, and so we thought for the first meeting of the subcommittee, let's just share some basic information about the combined authority for those who are unfamiliar with it. And then David and Adam will take over then later on and talk more specifically about Transport for West Midlands and specifically around the transport function, again as sort of background information for the committee before it starts its scrutiny work. So as I say, I'll talk about the combined authority, how it was set up, the ways of working, so particularly around the portfolio leads, and I'll explain those, then how scrutiny particularly works within the combined authority context, and finally just highlighting the transport governance arrangements that currently exist within the combined authority. So the CA itself, legally constituted bodies, so we're local authorities in a legal sense, in the same way as the authorities that you represent back at home, but they enable councils, groups of areas, so Shropshire and Herefordshire are unitary shire counties, and they're non-constituent authorities, so they are participants in what we do, but effectively elect into services and decisions, rather than the decisions of the combined authority are applied to that area. The combined authority was set up both in the West Midlands and across the other areas of the country to respond to particular national and regional challenges. So not all combined authorities have the same powers or functions. The powers and functions of each CA is very much dependent on what the local need of that area is. So that makes it sometimes difficult to compare one combined authority to another, because its powers and responsibilities do differ. But they are established within a local context to be able to respond to the issues of that local region. And as I said there at the bottom, so we have the non-constituent authorities, which are 10 councils that sit on the fringes of the Met area. And as well, the 3 local enterprise partnerships. So again, that's Black Country, Greater Birmingham, Solihull, and then Coventry and Warwickshire, and they are very active in combined authority meetings, and indeed have a representative that sits on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee itself. So when the CA was established, its vision was identified as about building a healthier, happier, better connected and more prosperous West Midlands. And so that's the theme that runs through all of the work it does. And it identified what we call portfolio lead areas. So the easiest comparison would be with your cabinet members, although our portfolio leads don't have executive decision-making powers, but they lead on these thematic areas, which have been identified as the sort of key work areas for the combined authority. And it was decided that you'll recognise many of the names next to those portfolio areas. So they are largely leaders of the constituent authorities that have been given responsibility to lead on a particular area. So culture and digital is led by Councillor Harley, who's leader of Dudley. That will focus particularly around the 5G work, and that's evolving technology. Economy and innovation is led by the leader of Wolverhampton Council, Ian Brookfield, looking at particularly at the moment, the comprehensive spending review and the asks of government around regeneration and the sort of economic asks. The leader of Solihull, Ian Courts, leads on environment and energy, and there's a big area of work there around the WM 2041, which is our carbon reduction strategy. And Councillor Courts leads on that. Councillor Bob Slay, who was the former leader of Solihull, not now, but is the deputy mayor, so he's deputy to Andy Street. He leads on finance and all of that sort of money side. Housing and land falls within the remit of the leader of Walsall Council, Mike Bird. A lot of work around brownfield land remediation, so we're securing funding from government to sort of put right brownfield land to enable housing to be built, so that falls within that portfolio area. Councillor Bridget Jones, who's the deputy leader of Birmingham, leads on inclusive communities. A lot of work at the moment around the Black Lives Matter movement. We also have a young combined authority, which is made up of representatives of the region under the age of 25. And there's a lot of engagement between Councillor Jones and the YCA, ensuring that those underrepresented voices are heard within our decision-making meetings. Productivity and Skills looks after the devolved funding on adult education budget, and the leader of Coventry, George Duggins, leads on that. Maria Crompton, who is the interim leader of Sandwell Council at the moment, leads on PSR, so public service reform and the social economy. So there's work that's looking at how public sector authorities can become more efficient and through closer working, and that work stream looks to coordinate that. Particularly key one, obviously, for this subcommittee is transport. Leader of Birmingham, Ian Ward, leads on that, and a lot of this is what David and Adam will come on to later, so we'll leave transport for the moment. And then finally, one of our non-constituent leaders, which is Councillor Izzy Seckham, leader of Warwickshire County Council, leads on the wellbeing portfolio. Obviously, that's very much relevant at the moment with all the COVID related work, and so the wellbeing board particularly has focus on that. So they're the broad areas of work of what the combined authority does, and how we split it down between council leaders having responsibility to lead on that area. But I should stress, as I said, they're not cabinet members, so they're not able to make decisions themselves, but they will lead on an item through the committees of the combined authority. So how do we work? As I say, we have an elected mayor, so the combined authority itself only has one elected politician, which is the mayor, currently Andy Street, elected in 2017. There was to have been an election this May. Obviously, that got cancelled along with all other elections within the country. So the election will now be next May, and he will be standing for re-election. He's currently the chair of the combined authority, chairs the combined authority board, which is the main decision-making body, and that comprises, along with the mayor, the political leadership from the councils, the constituent and non-constituent councils. Typically, amongst the constituents, it's the leader and deputy leader, so they have two representatives. Non-constituent authorities, their leader represents those, and collectively they meet as the WMCA board every other month, and that is chaired by the mayor, and that's where the majority of the policy decisions affecting the CA are made. And the point is that this is a collaborative event, so decisions are made largely by consensus, working collaboratively with constituent authorities and then the other membership, the non-constituents and LEPs, etc., and also through very close engagement with the government. So there is a lot of partnership working to the combined authority, and that will be apparent during your time here. And the general sort of theme again that runs through this is that there's more that we can achieve by working collectively than we can individually. So that's the ethos that the Combined Authority very much tries to promote at all times, is that the strength of the region is maximised through working together as councils and other public sector partners. So specifically coming to scrutiny now, the Combined Authority has a statutory requirement to undertake scrutiny. So in the legislation that established us said that we must have an overview scrutiny committee, we must undertake scrutiny, so very similar to your own local authorities. And the scrutiny function will hold the Mayor and the Combined Authority Board decision makers to account. Some of the ways that we'll do this, and you get a lot more flavour of this during the course of the year, but there are public Q&A sessions for the Mayor and the portfolio leads. So several times during the year there will be question and answer sessions that you will be involved in as members. Lindsay will explain those in a bit more detail later on when we look at the work programme. But you're having an opportunity to question the Mayor on his policies and on the delivery of those policies, as well as undertaking the similar tasks with the portfolio lead members. So in respect of this subcommittee, that'll be Councillor Ian Ward. We will schedule Q&A sessions for Councillor Ward to attend and for you to question him on those transport policies of the CA. And then we split, so obviously there's the two functions, overview and scrutiny committee, which can be a bit confusing sometimes, but if you think of overview as being about looking at policy development in a wider, broader context more strategically, so a big picture look at topics. Scrutiny is about drilling down and looking at decisions that either have been made or are just about to be made, and they're the two key elements of the work of the subcommittee. So in respect of transport governance, last year the Overview and Scrutiny Committee undertook a review into transport governance within the Combined Authority. As I said, we've been established since 2016, so it was thought a couple of years in it was worth looking at how transport governance was undertaken, and that was a scrutiny review that was led by Councillor Baton and other members from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. They identified a number of key findings, made recommendations to the Combined Authority Board. Pleased to say that all recommendations were agreed and adopted by the Combined Authority Board, and summarised basically in three key areas. One is respect of the Transport Delivery Committee, which I'll come on to in a minute, but to have a refresh of that meeting, look at again at its terms of reference, its function, what it's doing, how it works, but just to give that a refresh. It was recommended and agreed to establish a new Strategic Transport Board, which is a non-decision making body, but brings together the portfolio lead, Councillor Ward, and the transport cabinet members from the 7 constituent authorities into a single meeting where there can be discussions around strategic transport and sort of forward thinking and planning. And it was a really good idea, and that has taken off and been so well received. But it enables councils and councillors who are making decisions about transport within their own authorities to actually get together and talk these issues through and work through the sort of strategic aspects of it. And then the third one was the establishment of this subcommittee, so the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee. It was thought that given the importance of transport to the region and also the interconnectivity with the other functions of the CA, it really merited having a separate scrutiny board. And that was one of the recommendations that was agreed, and that's how we get to where we are today in the first meeting of the subcommittee. So transport governance, more generally within the Combined Authority, I tend to sort of categorise as a triangle, really. So 3 points to a triangle. If you look at the At the top point, there is the Combined Authority Board. So this is the meeting, I said, that was chaired by the Mayor and has the leaders and deputy leaders of all the councils on. So they're responsible for policy. So any transport policy matters are determined by the Combined Authority Board. The Strategic Transport Board, that was one of the recommendations of the governance review, is a new body, but they advise that Combined Authority Board. So they have the discussions amongst themselves on strategic transport matters, but will then help shape the policy. But to be clear, transport policy is determined at the main CA board. Bottom left then is the Transport Delivery Committee, and really, as the name suggests, they're responsible for the delivery of that policy. So if you think of transport policy set constituent authorities on it as well, and then the scrutiny of both of those aspects, the policy and delivery, falls now within the responsibility of this subcommittee. So policy, delivery and scrutiny are the three key points of transport governance within the Combined Authority. So what does this committee specifically do? The terms of reference are included in the pack of papers that Tanya sent out to you, so you'll have a detailed terms of reference. So I won't go through all of these, but broadly, you have a remit to look at anything to do with transport within the Combined Authority. So any of the transport powers that can be exercisable by the Mayor or the Combined Authority Board, and that will include Transport for West Midlands, and that's what we'll come on to in a minute. You'll scrutinise, or you're able to scrutinise, any transport related decisions that are taken at the Combined Authority Board or Transport Delivery Committee. And we do operate a call-in arrangement, similar, again, you'll be familiar with your own authority's call-in, very similar. So decisions taken at the Combined Authority Board or Transport Delivery Committee, you will get notified of those immediately after. And then if members of this subcommittee representing 5 different
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, well, in that case, we will move back then to continue the presentation and a further introduction to Transport for West Midlands. So if I hand over to is it David who's taking this?
It is, yeah. Thank you,
Okay.
Chair. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can, David.
Good, thank you.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So building on from what Dan's just said, I'm just going to do a very sort of brief sort of transport governance overview. So where did we come from and how did TFWM come to be? And then I'm going to just talk you through sort of what does Transport for West Midlands do, the sort of roles and responsibilities it has, a quick overview of the key people that I'm sure some of you are already familiar with, but will become more so through your role on this committee, a quick discussion about how we're funded, touch on the things we're planning to invest in to improve the transport system, and then a quick bit around sort of what the challenges for the future look like. So in terms of historic transport governance overview, until 2014, there was a separate passenger transport authority, the West Midlands Passenger Transport Executive, some of you will recall it known as Centro, and then a separate West Midlands Integrated Transport Authority, which set the strategic direction for the WMPT and also supported the local authorities. By 2014, it was considered that sort of arrangement needed reforming, and a simpler approach was required. So from 2014, the ITA was reformed to comprise of the 7 leaders of the metropolitan local authorities, and to bring things together into a clearer, more strategic, joined up place. So particularly around sort of things like how we get the maximise the benefits of HS2 and so on, and issues around the fact that there was a 3-LEP geography across the West Midlands wider area, and that was creating its own issues, and there was a need to sort of work better together. So from 2015 onwards, there was a further governance review led by the local authorities, and as subject to that, a shadow combined authority board was put in place, and then ongoing discussions looked around what powers should the CA have. Some of those obviously clearer what we have through some of the Devo deals, and I'll come on to that shortly. But things such as planning powers weren't part of the discussions, but clearly transport was a key area for focus. So in terms of our powers and responsibilities, Transport for West Midlands is the transport arm of the combined authority. And as Transport for West Midlands, we have responsibility for the constituent areas of the West Midlands, and that's the 7 metropolitan.
I'm sorry to interject, David. Sorry to interject at this point.
Yep.
Can I ask you to go back? Excuse me, Chair, if you don't mind. Chair.
Yeah. Okay, Jackie.
Chair, it's Councillor Taylor. I'm asking if David could go back to the previous slide, please.
Okay.
And I'm asking if you could start again, slow your presentation down a little bit, please. Could you explain exactly what we mean about what was previous? I can't quite grasp what you're saying.
Okay. Sure.
So I'm going a bit fast. So if you could just slow it down a little bit, please.
Sorry, apologies for talking too quickly. So what I was trying to explain was before 2014, Transport for West Midlands is now essentially both what was the Public Transport Authority, so the part of TFWM that is responsible for the operations and running of elements of the transport system and the coordination, but also the strategy and policy functions were separate in an organisation called the Integrated Transport Authority, and they were run separately. They were separate bodies. They were not under one umbrella and one organisation where they are now within Transport for West Midlands, and that happened from 2014 onwards when that reform started to happen. And then beyond 2014, there was a further governance review in 2015, from which eventually Transport for West Midlands as part of the combined authority was created. Does that help?
Yes, yeah, it's helpful that you've slowed it down a little bit for me.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I have a habit of talking fast when I'm doing presentations and also when I'm a bit nervous, so I apologise.
Oh, okay.
But I will take that on board. So are you okay if I move on to the next slide?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I was starting to talk about the role of Transport for West Midlands, the transport arm of the West Midlands Combined Authority. What I was also saying was that we only cover what's called the constituent area as the local transport authority. So that's the 7 metropolitan districts. We don't have transport responsibility for the non-constituent parts of the West Midlands Combined Authority. So that's quite a clear distinction to be made. We have a duty to produce the statutory strategic transport plan or local transport plan for that West Midlands metropolitan area. And Movement for Growth, which is on the screen, is our 4th local transport plan, and that was adopted by the combined authority back in 2016. In order to deliver our that transport strategy, we obviously work across the combined authority with different directorates, but also with our local authorities within the West Midlands, but also across the wider West Midlands Combined Authority, because clearly transport doesn't stop at those borders. So we also work with the non-cons and also with the LEPs to bring some of those forward. And as I'll touch on shortly, transport isn't just within our remit. There are a number of other organisations that have responsibility for developing transport policy and strategy and implementing them. So just looking quickly at what we do from a strategic level, one of our key areas, as I touched on, is developing our strategic transport plan and assessing and planning the region's future transport needs Obviously, we have a growing population. We need more housing. There'll be more jobs. But ultimately, there's a constrained space for transport. So we need to sort of look at how we manage congestion and all of these sort of bad impacts that transport potentially has on our environment and people. And we need to look at how we move people and goods most efficiently around the area. And we need to sort of then work out what best investments or policies are needed to deliver our collective objectives. And we coordinate that investment by planning our programme, by looking at what our investment priorities should be, and then through looking at developing business cases and securing funding, we make sure that we get the best value of money for those things that we then implement. We also then are responsible for operational delivery. You kind of describe it as the glue that fits the transport system together. We oversee things like transport branding. We look at the physical and digital networks, so things like the infrastructure, so bus stops, timetables, real-time information, etc., but also that the digital side of things, so real-time information, multi-operator smart ticketing, Swift cards, for example. And then we also have a role in the key route network, and we have increasingly had a greater involvement in how our highways across the area are managed. We have a statutory defined key route network, which is around 375 miles of road. It's only 7% of the West Midlands road network, but carries around 50% of all road traffic. So it's clearly very important. And we sort of use the care end to sort of focus investment and improvement on those key roads. We also oversee and maintain and run a range of socially important services, sometimes referred to as supported travel policies. These provide subsidy to a range of people across the West Midlands. They provide social benefit, and these include our concessions, both statutory ones like the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme, but also our discretionary ones such as 16 to 18 and so on, Ring and Ride, and also the tendered bus services that we operate. And we obviously have a relationship with transport operators. So we are a transport operator ourselves. We essentially own West Midlands Metro, who operates the West Midlands tram system. We co-manage the West Midlands Rail franchise as a partner on the West Midlands Rail Executive. And we also work with bus operators in partnership to improve and develop bus services through the Bus Alliance. So that's just a quick overview of the key people within TFWM. And I'm sure you all know Laura Schoaf, who is our managing director. And then across the top there are our key directors who oversee various elements of either strategy and policy or delivery or customer service. And Anne is on the call with us today, and she might want to jump in at some places if necessary. So what doesn't TFWM do? So we're not a highway authority. We do, through devolution, have some limited concurrent highway powers with the LAs, but we don't maintain the roads. We don't do maintenance. We're not responsible for parking enforcement, and we don't implement or introduce traffic regulation orders. We're also not a traffic authority, so we don't have responsibility for managing or running traffic signals or signage. Nor do we directly run bus or train services, but as I suggested, we do have a very strong relationship with rail and bus operators. Now, my slides have frozen up. There we go. So that's just a quick overview. It's sort of quite a complex area of responsibility between different actors who either develop strategy and policy, or actually implement and deliver services or maintain the infrastructure across there. So everything from obviously our local authorities who are responsible for highways and planning, all the way through to big sort of regional strategic bodies like Midlands Connect, who oversee sort of improvements to strategic road and rail we obviously have to sort of work and work in partnership with all these bodies to bring forward improvements to the transport system. Sorry. So I talked a few times about devolution. So just a quick bit around what do we mean by that. So essentially, that was bringing forward the powers that sat separately within the Integrated Transport Authority and the Passenger Transport Executive that I spoke about previously, and put them into one place, the Local Transport Authority, which is Transport for West Midlands. And then we secured a set of new powers and new funding arrangements in a number of deals from 2015 and 2017. And these I touched on earlier was powers around and setting up of the key route network. And we also have some powers around road safety. We can undertake bus lane enforcement and various other powers that we have to sort of bring forward improvements to the transport system, but working in partnership with our local authorities. And we also have powers, access to powers to tackle antisocial behaviour. We're taking those forward through the bus bylaws at the moment. And then building on that, we've done other things. So taking forward strategic approaches to reducing congestion. So setting up a network resilience partnership, and that's helped us to sort of build up and start to develop the regional traffic coordination centre. So how are we funded? So overall, the most activity and the way Transport for West Midlands is run is funded through the Transport Levy, which is a power that the combined authority has to sort of raise money from the local authorities, which you obviously all be aware of. We have a budget of around 115.7 million at the moment. But as the table on the graph shows, over time, the Transport Levy has continued to reduce, largely as a response to sort of reductions in the amount of funding that local government has had overall, and then the amount of money that's passported from the constituent authorities through to Transport for West Midlands has obviously had to be negotiated and reduced within that. That levy obviously funds staff, but it also funds things like the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme, and also the discretionary supported travel policies that I referred to earlier. So that includes the Ring and Ride, child concessions, the rail and metro add-ons to the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme, and also the tendered bus network. So we are continuing to invest in our transport. We've been able to secure £23 million of investment to go into that as well. And we're also one of the leaders in future mobility, our future transport zone. We've secured significant funding from government to sort of develop and test future transport mobility innovation in the region. And my presentation's frozen up again. Apologies. So one of the key things that we've secured in recent years was devolved funding through the Transforming Cities Fund, and that has helped us to take forward some of these key projects. And because the funding was devolved to us, it's allowed us to make better decisions about how and where we spend that money and to maximise the impact of that investment. So the 321.5 million that we received, we've been able to unlock an additional £695 million worth of investment to take forward a range of key projects, including the Wednesbury to Briar Hill extension. And this is important when we're targeting investment into sort of key areas such as our inclusive growth corridors. So, for example, into areas like Walsall to Wolverhampton, where we're regenerating and putting in lots of money around brownfield site regeneration, bring forward housing alongside transport investment to provide better connectivity to those areas with services to Birmingham, for example, but also along the West Bromwich to Dudley corridor, along the new metro line to help accelerate sort of regeneration in that area. We're still looking to improve and get better with our arrangements with government around funding. And this week, the Combined Authority Board will consider a report setting out ask the government around the comprehensive spending review for future funding arrangements. And this builds on the recommendations of the National Infrastructure Commission review, which looked around sort of what we call a single pot infrastructure fund. So rather than having to bid or have very short term sort of financial settlements, we have more certainty around the funding that we have across a range of areas, which allows us to make more strategic, more longer term investment decisions around our funding going forward. And we've asked for a single pot around transport, housing and digital infrastructure. And this would allow us to be more agile and responsive in how we deliver this ambition for growth. And by combining our transport and housing investment, we're hopefully buying better outcomes and making better places by making the most of what are reasonably limited resources. So there are still challenges. So there's a lot of positive stuff that's been happening over the last few years, but there are still some big issues that we need to tackle. And that includes sort of how we ensure that our growth is inclusive. Not everyone is benefiting from regional growth, and the impacts of the pandemic are likely to reinforce this. And we need to think how we come out of this situation in a positive way. The climate crisis is significant, and it will present many challenges for our transport system. Transport is one of the biggest emitters, and its contribution has, unlike other sectors, not gone down. And then there's issues around sort of, how do we make the transport system better for people to have more active lifestyles and so on. And there's also then sort of how do we make use of these innovations that we're now a leader in, and apply those in a positive way that's to the benefit of the West Midlands economy. So we're currently developing a new local transport plan, reviewing movement for growth. And in the interim, what we have done is we've developed a recovery plan, building on the back of measures that have been put forward through the Emergency Active Travel Fund, which the local authorities have been delivering in partnership with ourselves. And this will set out in the short term how the West Midlands will approach the recovery from the pandemic. And those are our 5 key priorities for recovering our transport system over the coming months and years. But beyond that, the challenge of particularly around climate change is significant. And we know that we need a new transport plan that specifically will tackle the challenges of climate change. So at the moment, we're developing our 5 motives for change, and tackling the climate emergency is clearly one of those. But we see that the transport system has a role in those 4 other areas as well, which include creating a fairer society, helping our people to become healthier and more active, the need to support our local communities, particularly with changing travel behaviours and the sort of end of traditional retail as we see it. So, a move to more sort of local centres, and also how we build a stronger economy. So making sure that our transport investments and our transport system make sure that we have a successful West Midlands economy. So that's a kind of brief overview of some of the things that Transport for West Midlands is currently focusing on. Again, happy to take any questions, or we can take those as sort of more consolidated session after all these presentations.
Okay, thank you very much for that that presentation. We just felt it was important for the committee to understand funding arrangements and the context of where we are. We will be taking the development of the local transport plan on the 30th of November as a standalone item in more detail. So that will give members the chance to question much deeper on that. Yeah. So Do I have any questions from anybody at the moment? Can't see any hands up. Any questions? No? Okay.
Hello.
Well,
Hello.
yeah.
Hello.
That's Phil.
I'm a bit on the delay side. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, it's all right.
Could I just ask if it's possible, just so I can get my head around some of the statistics, if we could have some statistical information sent to us. I know that every year there was a pack that was put together that looked in detail at what had been achieved and that. And I wondered whether or not, if that's still done, whether certainly I could have a copy of that. That would be helpful, because it would help me get my head around some of the issues that relate to the network. I know we're in really difficult times, and transport ain't like anything we've known or built for donkey's years. But it was still, there's still things that are really the bedrock of all that we do in our local authorities around the commercial network of bus services and the socially necessary networks. And I'd like to understand where we are in terms of the commercial network as it stands, I suppose, up until March anyway, if not a little bit beyond, and the socially network service development, whether or not that's increased or in actual fact as those two issues would be very helpful for me, along with the other statistics, so that I can certainly get to grips with what's happening on a combined authority basis, because inevitably for me over the last few years it's very much Wolverhampton based, and that's a different role to the one that I've accepted today and going forward in terms of the conurbation.
Annual plan review that sort of gives a high level of some of the transport activity that we've been doing, but I don't think it necessarily goes into detail around subsidised services. I'm sure we can take that away and come back. John Hayes, who's our head of bus, is on the call, and he may wish to say something. He may have some of these numbers off the top of his head, but I'm sure we could go away and come back with a bit of an overview about some of the things you've just mentioned, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Is that okay for you, Phil?
It might be that John can just add a few things around subsidised bus.
I was going to suggest, David, that we provide that after in, but as a general rule of thumb, up until now, the provision of subsidised services has remained relatively static. Obviously, costs have gone up as patronage has come down, because there's less fare revenues coming in, which is putting a greater level of commercial strain. But with COVID-19 and the impacts of the pandemic, reducing patronage levels, currently fully supported by central government through DFT grants. But obviously we're going to have to watch this space a little bit as and when that funding either starts to taper away or is withdrawn. And I think that's something we need to keep a really close eye on. Will obviously have an impact as we go forward. But we can provide the detailed stats up to this point, I would suggest, after the meeting.
Yeah, we've also got the supported travel policies on the agenda for the 19th of October. So it might be that we have more, you provide more statistical detail for that meeting, if that's okay. Thank you. I've got Councillor Liz Clement showing you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, and thanks to Dan and Dave for the presentations. It's just a couple of thoughts arising from that. I'm aware that the consultation on the enhanced partnership, I think the closing date was yesterday, wasn't it? And I'm very interested about how this committee is going to input into that, and also in general what our sort of policy development role is going to be. So that was the first question stroke comment. Then the second question is I'm also interested in the use that the member councils are making of the emergency transport fund at the moment, because we're in Birmingham, we're really in the thick of trying to implement the measures, and we're getting a certain amount of backlash as the measures become reality. But I think I'm very much see this as an exciting time where we can actually start to challenge ingrained car culture and look at making it easy for people to make short journeys on foot and by bike. But I'm just very interested in how that policy is being shaped by TFWM and David and his colleagues. So I'd be very interested in getting an update on that. And we've taken a few updates in the Scrutiny Committee in Birmingham. And as I say, it's very easy to talk about the principles, but when it starts to become a reality, then you start to hit up against people's prejudices about things like low traffic neighbourhoods. So that's a big interest for me at the moment.
I think we will pick up, Liz, in the next presentation, some of the emergency active travel fund measures, particularly those in relation to school travel. I know that's on our presentation. Do you want to see what comes back on Anne's presentation before you, and then if it doesn't answer your questions, we can have a further update?
That's fine. Well, I suppose I was thinking of it as an item for a future meeting. Yeah.
Right, okay. Okay, anything else from anybody? No, nothing else from anyone? Okay, it's 22:12 now, so if we can move on to the next item then, please, which is Anne's presentation. This meeting is scheduled to finish at 12:30, so it is a very, very long presentation. Well, we've got an awful lot of detail in your presentation, Anne, so I think it's probably presenting it as as quickly as you can, and then it'll give members more time to ask questions, because I think they've already had most of the information. So I'll pass over to yourself.
Okay, I've put a presentation on the screen. Is that now visible to you all?
It is.
Yeah,
we
can see
it. It is. Thank you.
Okay, so what we did is we've circulated a couple of papers with the agenda. I'm not intending to go through those papers, you'll be relieved to hear. John and I are just going to very quickly summarise in terms of where we are with school restart. So just give you a little bit of background. Obviously, government was committed to getting all schools back up and term and making sure that education restarted as part of that as well. So guidance was published in July. I think it came out in the last week of the previous school half term. So we had to very quickly look at what the guidance was asking us to do and make sure that we were able to get all schools and colleges back up and running and ensuring that all school children were able to get to and from school as well. So obviously lots of activity in the schools themselves, but keeping children safe starts with and ends with getting them there safely. So we did have some funding that came with that as well. So there was just under £2.5 million that came as part of some additional funding from the Department for Education. And then we also had some funding for something that we call travel demand management, which I will explain a little bit later. In terms of responsibilities, local authorities themselves do have some statutory responsibilities around school children that need some specific support to get to and from school. So whether that ranges from free travel tickets to personal travel budgets to their families or dedicated services where there's accessibility requirements, etc. And then Transport for West Midlands has the responsibility for overseeing the rest of the general public transport system. So what does the general bus services look like? And then also working with colleagues on our tram and bus systems as well. So those responsibilities are really important to remember, that there are some things that the local authorities themselves needed to do, and then we were supporting that, as well as trying to make sure that the general transport system was working. Just to give you some stats, I'm always pleased to hear when people ask about stats as well. We have just under 800 or just over 800,000 school children across our region. So no mean task making sure that we had the transport system that was able to do that as well. And then in terms of the networks themselves, In time for schools, the bus network had gone over 100%. So we added in more capacity to the bus network, particularly for schools and business restart. The tram service also went back to its usual timetable. So 6-minute service during the peak hours, and then trains were slightly later, a week later from schools restart. Trains went back up to about 95% of their pre-COVID timetable levels. So we're making sure that we've got as much of the public transport system working, if not more, in order to make sure that we can get those children to and from school. But we wanted to make sure that we were targeting our efforts in the right place. So we had a bit of a strategic approach to how we did this. We needed to analyse the data. And that was really important for us to understand where the demand was and where we had limited capacity on the network as well. And then that helped us to develop the mitigation solutions. So what was it that we needed to do in terms of enhancing the network services, and what other measures could we put in place to try and make sure that children went to and from school as well. And then communication, really important for us to make sure that head teachers, parents and children knew exactly what the transport system was doing, and overlaid with where we knew the schools, where the school clusters, the college clusters, etc., and where we would see some of that heavier demand on the network as well. So the analysis was really important to help us understand where we needed to concentrate our efforts. And then this is just a screenshot from Day. This is how the public transport system is being used, as well as the road network as well. And we can see back in March, which is to the left-hand side of that graph, we can see how the use of the roads and the public transport system really did drop off part of that. And as we can see now, taking us all the way through to September, we're seeing increases on our public transport system as well. So as well as schools, we're making sure that we're trying to cater for all of the journey types that people are trying to make, so that they can either get to work or go to the shops, etc., as part of that. So in terms of building capacity and managing demand, we needed to look at the public transport system, and John will come in the next couple of slides and just give you an overview of what we did on bus. And then we also needed to make sure that we were reducing some of that demand. So that travel demand management, trying to work with schools and work with alongside the local authorities to get children to do something different. So encouraging that walking and cycling as well, so that we could remove some journeys off public transport where capacity was an issue. And it wasn't just focused at school children as well. There's other people making journeys on bus, on train and tram, who may be going to work at that time of the day as well. So some of the things that we've all with some of our business restart is to ask people to make journeys at different times of the day, or to remove some of those journeys off the network, so that we could provide some additional capacity for school children. As part of that funding, we've brought in 5 full-time travel demand management to increase our travel planning capacity. They've been sort of deployed out with the local authorities and working directly with schools as part.
And take all the questions together, just because otherwise, if we get long answers, then we're going to might run over time.
That's fine.
I'll bring you in as the first question at the end, Jackie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yeah, just building on from what Anne's just said. So in addition to developing the watch spots, we also took a data-led approach with local bus operators. So mainly using data from September 2019, we were able to use that to identify specific trips on services, whether they be dedicated school services or on the public transport network, where we could expect obviously an impact and expect increases in numbers of people using those services for the return to school. On the softer side of things, we also engaged with our stakeholders, so working very closely with the transport officers within each of the local education authorities to ensure that we understood what measures were being taken around statutory responsibilities within each of the 7 districts, but also use them as a mechanism then to engage with the schools more closely, and also with the colleges. And TFWM attended a subgroup of the West Midlands college principals to discuss specifically around transport and their return to college from the start of September, the new academic year. So once we'd gathered all the data together, that gave us a really good understanding of where those pressures were going to be. And then we had a number of mechanisms by which we could build capacity across the network. So the local education authorities primarily focused their attentions towards additional capacity on special educational needs and disability, where their statutory responsibility lies. Obviously, with social distancing requirements, there is additional capacity required, and they have used their own fleets or brought in additional suppliers to build the requirements there and working with their service providers. We then took over for the next 3 bullet points, how we then engage with bus operators. So there was 3 methods that we undertook. The first one was building around capacity on the general public transport network, so strengthening the network to enable greater movement of pupils and students at school opening times. We also worked through dedicated school services. So these are services that are closed door to members of the public, so only carry school children. We were able to, or have been able to, put additional duplicate services in to provide additional capacity at school times. And then the third one is around school specials. So these are generally services that operate for members of the public, but are only used by school children normally. We've redesignated those as dedicated school services. And the reason for doing that is that under the government guidance, social distancing and other measures do not apply on those services. So it means we're able to bring in additional capacity relatively easy if we were to adhere to the government guidance that applies to the public transport services at this moment in time. So yeah, we adhered to the government guidance. So on those dedicated services, while social distancing doesn't apply, obviously we wanted to work with the schools and colleges to ensure that pupils could remain in their bubbles as closely as possible, and we're working with various schools to try and make that happen. Face coverings as well, trying to ensure that pupils wear their face coverings. Obviously the driver is there to drive the vehicle and encourages as best he can when passengers are boarding. But again, we've been working with schools and colleges on a wider communication campaign to encourage use of face coverings across the board. And there's also additional guidance around use of vehicles, and particularly around being able to use coaches on public transport services, recognising that we've only got a finite amount of buses, but because of the market at the moment, there are coaches kicking around that we've been able to use and utilise. At our bus passenger facilities, so bus stations, interchanges, and school and college gates, obviously those are points where we see numbers of pupils and students loading. So we've put in various measures to allow them to social distance at our facilities and encourage them to maintain social distancing requirements and use of face coverings as well. I think Anne's going to come on to staying safe on the network, and that forms a key part of that. So there's a lot of work around comms, around staffing, and ensure that engagement happens with those groups and in educating them on the reasons as to why social distancing is a requirement and use of face coverings as well. We've been able to receive additional funding from the DFT. So we've had something called the COVID-19 Bus Services Support Grant. There's 2 elements to that. One element comes through the local authority for the tendered network, and the other element is going direct to commercial bus operators. They've used that to strengthen their networks, as have we, to ensure that they keep operating during the pandemic and also enable them to provide additional capacity to meet the demands at school and college return. And then, as mentioned by Anne, there was the additional 2.5 million from the DFT for the first half of the autumn term to strengthen public transport networks to make sure that transport wasn't the blocker for students and pupils going back to school. Anne, do you want to move to the next slide?
I'm trying. Hang on.
There we go. So yeah, from a practical point of view, so there was a big service change on Sunday the 30th of August, where all of the bus operators brought their networks back to 100% of pre-COVID capacity. in practical terms, that actually went up to 103%, because obviously additional vehicles were brought into the network to meet or to mitigate for the requirements for social distancing on bus. And then we also brought in some additional school provision from the network, and additional strengthening around those school-only services. We then went into a period of monitoring and evaluation. So that's been quite intensive for the last 2 weeks. So at a very early stage, just monitoring social media. I think in the modern age, we all recognise that the first indication of any issues on the network is via social media. So we were monitoring that on a daily basis and continue to do so. Receiving direct communications from members of the public and parents in particular around any issues that might be occurring, and then also feedback from operators, schools, colleges, the LEAs, and the other transport providers as well. On the back of that feedback, we were then obviously reviewing our provision and providing additional capacity where we need to, and we made a number of additional services and put additional capacity into the network from week commencing the 1st of September, and that has continued. We're seeing the network settle down now as we're getting some better indication of how many passengers and pupils are likely to continue to travel, albeit we've got one eye on the future, with universities now starting to come back and understanding what impact that will have when students start to come back onto the network as well. We have revised our operational plans, so just kept those under review at bus stations and bus interchanges to ensure that they are effective and meeting requirements, and we've revised and reviewed those as well, and we're making greater use of the Safer Travel Partnership to ensure that that is adhered to and educated. And I just, before I hand back to Anne, I just wanted to add a little bit of a footnote, just to for our colleagues from Coventry in the week before we're dealing with the return to school. We also saw our second biggest provider of school transport in Coventry, a company called Travel de Courcy, unfortunately went into administration in that week. They provided numerous services across the city, and also for Solihull, providing home to school transport. And Transport for West Midlands were asked by Coventry City Council to assist them in providing duplicate services and ensure that any children, pupils and students that were affected by that event, to ensure that they could continue to get to school. And we were successful in being able to do that, and put quite a lot of additional provision in for within 4 days of the ask coming from Coventry City Council and making that happen. We're continuing to review the provision of those services to make sure that they have got sufficient capacity initially, but also to try and see if we can identify some efficiencies within that operation, and working with colleagues at Coventry to understand what's the longer term implications of providing those services into the future. So it's just an indication that with all the service planning that we do and everything else, there's always something that happens at the end, and that we are fleet of foot enough to be able to deal with that, and that we've got the capacity and resource available to us to take it forward. Back to you, Anne.
Okay, so apologies, but I do seem to have a bit of a bad network today, so I'm hoping you can still hear me. Just to move it on then, John mentioned Safer Travel Partnership. So for those of you who are not familiar with Safer Travel Partnership, it is a partnership between West Midlands Police, British Transport Police and Transport for West Midlands. They've been out patrolling the network and making sure that there's adherence to social distancing and face coverings as well. And they've been doing some particular targeted interventions, particularly around areas where we see higher footfall of school children, and working on some of our public transport routes where we see higher patronage by school children and college children as well. So they've been pretty active out on the network. John's already run through in terms of what we've been doing at bus stations and working with our travel shops to make sure that the layout is fit for purpose. for social distancing, and our staff are also educating, encouraging, and we've also taken the decision to hand out face coverings to those children who are required to wear them, so that's 11 plus, to make sure that they've got them to hand as well. We've also been arranging for some volunteers to also help man some of those busier places, again to support some of that education and reinforce the requirements around social distancing, and our rail colleagues at the rail stations have been doing the same as well. Also, one of the things that we were concerned about with some people's perceptions of public transport and some of the issues that may cause is that there would be more people driving their children to school as well. Again, why we've been trying to do that travel demand management, encouraging more active travel through walking and cycling transport.
And we're losing you. And you've dropped out completely. I've got no sound from you.
Short teams as well. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unshare the presentation and I'll just fly through it to the end because hopefully that might make my bandwidth a little bit better. So I'm assuming you can all hear me again now.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I've just mentioned about the highway network, that was just something that we had some concerns with. We also put a big communication campaign together. So there was a school toolkit that we sent out to all schools as well, which was encouraging head teachers to pass on information about what children needed to do around travel, where they could check for information as part of that as well. And then targeting particularly those routes where we know there is higher demand for school and college children as part of that. And then there's some examples which were in the presentation, but I'll share that afterwards. I mentioned earlier about business travel advice as well. So that was trying to make sure that we were moving people who weren't at the same time as school children were trying to get to school off the network, so asking them to retime their journeys as part of that. And then we use the Regional Transport Coordination Centre, where we can see the network at a multimodal level. It also includes all of our CCTV as well, so we've got eyes on the network. That's where we can see how busy stations and stops are, where we can see how many people are wearing face coverings or not, where we can observe social distancing measures as part of that as well, and helping us to inform, as John says, we've been reviewing on a daily basis any sort of problems that have been arising so that we can tackle those head on with solutions and track the actions around that as well. So in terms of travel planners, we've reached to about 132 schools so far. These are in the particular watch spot locations where we know we've got some problems, and that's where some schools have contacted us directly or where we've proactively gone in to try and help get people to travel differently to school as well. Safer Travel have been out on patrol in places like Wolverhampton, Halesoe and Dudley Stourbridge and West Bromwich bus stations, as well as on a number of our rail stations as well, and have been patrolling some of the busy bus services like the 74 and the number 11, as well as being on the cross-city line for rail as well. And then I've got some stats in the presentation which just gives you how many website, all the information is available on our website. We set up some dedicated downloadable information which people can use, and we've been monitoring how many people have been accessing that as well. The most viewed subpage actually was Coventry schools, probably reflective of the issue with Travel de Courcy going out of business, and the sort of very quick turnaround that John and the team did in terms of making sure that the bus network was up and running in time over in Coventry and Solihull as well. But I'll share the presentation afterwards and it will give you all of that statistical information.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne, for the presentation. I've got a couple of members showing that they'd like to ask questions. So first of all, I'll bring in Councillor Taylor and then I'll move to Councillor Kettle. So Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. There's just a couple of things, really. The first thing is about our young people who are currently using public transport, and we've all got a duty of care to be corporate parents. And so my question to you is this: how are we actually physically managing social distancing on our buses and other modes of public transport? For example, we can't expect one bus driver to actually be monitoring what's going on the buses and other transport in terms of keeping our young people safe. So can I just ask you, Anne, what thoughts have been put into this during this time of COVID, please?
So there's John will probably want to chip in here as well, I would think, but there's quite a lot that we've been doing in terms of education. So there's lots of posters and information that's been put out at bus stops and bus stations, also with colleagues in our rail stations and on our tram network as well, which is giving as much information as we can so that young people know what their responsibilities are. And also I mentioned the school back to school toolkit. That's also providing, again, as much information that we can disseminate through schools to parents and to children about what their responsibilities are in terms of, if they're over 11, is wearing their face covering as well, and then the requirements around social distancing. So we've focused very much on education as part of our tactic as well. And as I've just mentioned, Safer Travel Police and our colleagues at bus stations, etc., have also been proactively monitoring and managing those locations and speaking to young people and making sure that they're aware of those responsibilities. And we've also, where kids have turned up with no face covering, we've had quite a big supply and we've been handing them out. And then we've got Safer Travel Police a supply so that they could hand them out, and all of our station staff are doing the same as well as our volunteers. In terms of the infrastructure, we've been putting specific measures out at the bus stations. I think John mentioned some of those earlier, but John, do you just want to sort of elaborate on that as well?
Yeah, cool. There's a couple of things really. The first one, Councillor Tay, you mentioned bus drivers there. Obviously, their role is quite important in this, but working alongside the inspectorate staff as well as our Safer Travel Police. But it's different for different services. So on the public transport network, so this is the services that are available to everybody, the drivers are monitoring how many people are on the bus at any one time, in line with the capacity of that bus. It's obviously different because of social distancing. When the driver meets that capacity, they then carry on past bus stops, i.e. not letting other people on, and phone into the depot to say, I've got a problem on this route, we need another vehicle out here, or we need to provide additional capacity along those routes. Now, obviously, in most cases in the West Midlands, we're quite lucky in that we've got a very frequent bus service on a lot of routes. So in most cases, it's just a case of the member of the public waiting for the next bus to come along. But where there is a lower capacity, then National Express or the other bus operators actually have got around 50 spare vehicles that they're bringing in at short notice to pick those people up. Where it's a dedicated school service, and this addresses your point around young people, is actually the government guidance is that social distancing doesn't apply in those cases. So actually you can utilise the full capacity of the bus. However, what we're working towards is working very closely with the schools to ensure that the pupils remain within any bubbles that they're adhering to within schools, so i.e. sitting within form or year groups within the bus to try and reduce the spreading of any cases that might be on that vehicle. We've also got track and trace processes in place as well, and working closely with the schools to understand which students are on which vehicles. So if we do have a case, and then we can quickly identify who may have come into contact with the with the individual. So yeah, working closely in that case. Where we then identify particular issues. So if we get issues on a bus that the driver reports or the school reports, then as Anne said, we can then get the Safer Travel out there to educate, engage, work with young people, to encourage them to adhere to the social distancing requirements and use of face coverings. And then on the public transport network, we've also working with our own teams internally to monitor and encourage and engage, but also the Safer Travel Police and National Express in particular have got a large number of inspectors that patrol the network, and they're riding on the buses, again engaging with members of the public to try and encourage them as best they can to adhere to social distancing and use of face coverings as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very reassuring. Chair, I've only got a little half of a question now. Just half of the question to Anne. Anne, you said the regional TDM support from Mark MacDonald and spatial analysis from ESRI UK. What does that mean, Anne?
So we've brought in some additional capacity through Mott MacDonald through the funding that we've had from DFT, and that's providing 5 travel planners, which the ESRI platform helps us sort of to crunch the data and analyse the data so that we can concentrate our efforts in the right place.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jackie, for your questions. I'd just like to make a comment where I think it's I am concerned about the fact that the dedicated school services, that the government believe that there is no social distancing requirement on those services other than to attempt to maintain the bubbles and face coverings. And I guess time will tell over the coming weeks whether that is actually going to cause us an issue and a problem. Councillor Kettle, I had your hand up earlier, but I can't see it anymore. Did you want to come in?
I think Councillor Kettle has left the meeting, Chair.
Oh, right, okay, thanks, Liz. So no question there then. Do I have any questions from anybody?
Thanks, Kathy. It was really just to say I thought that was a very impressive, detailed and reassuring presentation, because I've had a lot of queries. As a ward councillor, I had a lot of queries from head teachers in my own ward.
It was a really, really positive step. And actually, I'm questioning really whether this should be replicated across all local authorities. And that's the provision of transport home for any pupil or student showing symptoms of COVID-19 whilst at school or college. Now, I'm presuming that would require the provision of a taxi or something to take them. But if Sandswell are using part of their money for that would seem to me to be a really good thing. Do we have any sort of capacity to ask for that to happen everywhere?
Chair, I can answer that if you'd like.
Yeah.
Under the DFE guidance, it's actually a statutory requirement for each of the districts to, as a last resort, provide travel home for any pupil that shows symptoms of having COVID-19 whilst they are at school. Now, in most cases, it is envisaged that the parents would arrange that transport and either come and collect them themselves, or walk them home, or find whatever means to get them back. So this is almost an emergency provision to have a process in place where we could provide that transport. One sector that's been able to help here is the third sector, and we've used voluntary organisations in the shape of our community transport providers to enable them to provide that service. So these are groups that are used to carrying SEND pupils, used to carrying people to hospitals, have got the drivers and the abilities to be able to do that. And one of our other directors says that these are carers that drive rather than drivers that care. So it's that element of service provision that they do. So we've actually been able to offer all of 7 districts, not just Sandwell, to provide that service. It's just that Sandwell has identified that as one of the means that they want to use that funding for. I would suspect in reality they'd all use that funding to provide that service as and when the need arises and it's called upon. Thankfully, fingers crossed, nobody's had to call on that as yet, but we have got those arrangements in place should it be needed. Probably in addition, probably worth noting as well that those providers were also asked by the hospitals as well to provide that service for any NHS staff that were showing signs of COVID during work that they were undertaking at that time, and a few have been utilised to lift home for doctors, nurses and auxiliary staff during this period whilst they were showing signs of COVID as well. And obviously there were numbers of measures put in place with the drivers, with any escorts and on the vehicles themselves to ensure that they remained safe as and when they were providing that service.
Just another quick question for me on that 2.4 million. How was that distributed across the Mets? Was it an equal distribution, or was it money that had to be bid for?
No, there was a process put in place with the finance directors for each authority, including our own at the combined authority as well. So each local authority.
But the schools predominantly went back last week. Was there anything that happened during last week's provision of transport that you weren't anticipating, or provided any particular operational difficulties?
Do you want to pick that one up, John?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think there was anything that we weren't anticipating, but I think it comes down to things that you don't know are going to happen, really. Whenever we do a large service change, or there is an event that happens on the network, we just have to make sure that we are fleet of foot enough and dynamic enough to address anything that comes out. So it's not that we weren't prepared to address any issues. It's just that obviously you're sort of sitting and waiting for things to happen. So by and large, it's gone very successfully so far. There were some additional provision we've had to put on in and around Solihull in particular. I guess one thing that we've had to react to that I hadn't anticipated was the number of school children that used the rail services, and those that couldn't be carried on the rail network in particular, where either the rail industry themselves have actually been able to provide additional capacity, have met that additional demand, and have done that very successfully. But in the meantime, we'd put in place a potential fallback option of using coaches to sit alongside that rail provision as well, and bring those in. So I think if there was a lesson learned, it was probably just making sure that we got that ability to bring that in. As it was, we were able to provide coaches almost, well, literally overnight to bring that additional capacity in. I think we've still got one eye on the future, though. I don't think we've got all of the college students yet back. So they'll be coming back over the coming days and coming weeks. So we've still got to keep an eye on how they return, and then from this week and next week in particular, the university students will be coming back as well, and they'll be bringing numbers of students back in and providing that. And I think the other thing that we've learned from all of this, it's not just been around managing the schools and colleges coming back. It's also working with the sort of latent demands of those people that are already on the network, and thinking about how they journeys, so they're moving away from that peak period when schools and college students are travelling to release that capacity. It's safe to say there is enough capacity on the public transport network if the journeys were equally spaced over the day, but unfortunately it doesn't quite work like that, because people all want to travel at the same time around the peaks, so it's about spreading that demand and encouraging people to go. I think the other thing perhaps that sits with me, I don't know if it does with you, Anne, as well, is making the public and parents and pupils aware that they're going to have particularly on frequent services. They may not be able to get on the first bus that comes along, but if they wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, hopefully there will be capacity on that one that takes them home. So just to leave more time for their journeys when they are travelling. There's plenty of capacity out there. It just, again, might not be at the time that they want to travel.
Yeah, and absolutely, that plan ahead message is something that we're really keen to make sure people do, both morning and after school as well. I think if I can just flip that question on its head a little bit as well, one of the things that we did anticipate, which probably didn't happen as much as we thought it may, was the increase in demand for car travel. So we're really concerned, based on some of the concerns of parents, is that there would be more people driving their children to school. That hasn't happened in the sort of quantity. There has been localised congestion around a number of schools, and that's something that we've been monitoring and working with each of the local authority transport teams as well. And it's something that we're very keen to make sure doesn't happen. So there has been an increase in car traffic more generally, but around schools, I don't think it's been as big as we'd had planned for as part of that. We actually had West Midlands Police motorbike police officers out on the network working with us last week as well. Their main function was to just sort of deal with any congestion hotspots, particularly where we've got buses stuck in congestion that we were trying to get school kids to school on time. They didn't really have to do a great deal other than managing sort of just general congestion, a couple of broken down vehicles and things like that as well. So that was something that we planned for that we didn't actually need as part of that as well. So obviously road safety with more people walking, cycling, catching a bus or driving, particularly around the school gate, was something that we were quite keen to make sure that we had an eye on that. But that's been a little bit better than we'd anticipated, but not to say that there hasn't been an increase in car traffic. There has.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from anybody else?
Question.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Just a very quick one. I'd just like to underline this. I heard what you said about having the safer travel team out at bus stops, bus stations. I think there is a particular issue when it comes to face masks on local bus services. Certainly in Wolverhampton, we picked up lots of complaints. People who are concerned, I would say scared, about seeing people on the bus in large numbers, not socially distancing and not wearing face masks. I asked Wolverhampton last week, I asked National Express last week if they...
You've frozen, Phil.
Highly used.
We can't hear
you. And to make point, I think
I'm not sure.
I'll shut up and all right.
Not sure whether.
Hello.
Go on. We struggled to hear your question. We lost the end of it. And are you able to?
I think I can try and respond to Councillor Bateman on that basis. So we have seen a drop in compliance with face coverings. So obviously initially it was you had to wear a face covering when boarding and whilst on a bus or a train or a tram. You didn't at first have to have that on whilst you were in sort of enclosed bus stations, etc. That's changed, and we've changed all the messaging around that as well. So that's something that we're trying to reinforce with safer travel. So when you're actually inside a bus station, in the same way that you're inside a shopping centre or shop, you need to wear your face covering. And Safer Travel Police, prior to the schools restarting, had done a bit of an operation. They'd issued what we call about 900 directions to leave. So they'd taken a number of people off public transport where they were refusing to wear a face covering and they didn't have a good reason not to as well. And some of those actually translated into some prosecutions as well, just a small handful. So they've been very proactive. And obviously with school children, slightly different, more vulnerable, and that sort of corporate parenting that Councillor Taylor mentioned earlier. We're wanting to make sure that we're educating young people about the importance of face covering. So not using directions to leave or any prosecutions with school children, but trying to be really proactive to make sure that they understand what their responsibilities are through their parents and teachers, what the responsibilities of those children's are as well, to make sure that we've got that increase. So we're working with everybody across the network, from operators to our bus station staff and to our own safer travel team, to try and make sure that that education is bringing that compliance level back up as well. And that's also around social distance. So we've introduced new queuing systems in some of our bus stations as well, to encourage a little bit more formality around how kids queue at the bus stop to wait for their service to arrive as well, just to make sure that that social distancing message is reinforced too.
Okay, thank you very much.
John?
Yeah, just to add to that as well, Councillor Bateman, I think in your dialogues with National Express, they probably told you that National Express drivers and drivers from other bus operators are recording on their ticket machines where they've got particular enables us to undertake a intelligence-led response by the Safer Travel team to focus on particular services where we've got an issue, and that focuses their attentions. I guess one thing that needs to be recognised, though, there are exemptions for people to use face coverings, and we estimate it's around 10% of the population have got various issues that mean don't need to wear a face covering, and they're physically apparent either. So people that are travelling do need to understand that, and that mental health issues, physically being able to not put them on or take them off, or from breathing issues such as so that there are reasons as to why people may not be wearing a face covering when they are using public transport as well.
Okay, thanks for that. Final question then from Councillor Clements.
Hi, thanks, Kathy. Just been having a few problems because my broadband is a bit ropey, so I keep on dropping out. Just in relation to the face masks issue, I've actually had a lot of complaints from older bus passengers about that they're feeling scared on buses, say on the 11 route or the services along Bristol Road. And it's actually on the bus. Is there any number that they can text or anything that they can do, to alert the Safer Travel team?
Yeah, I will come back to you with that number. We did have a number where you could report issues. We have been looking at whether or not we can use that for people to send messages about face coverings as well. So it's something that we're actively looking at, Councillor Clement. So we will come back to you on that particular one.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can you make sure that when you do have that detail shared with everyone, please?
Yeah.
I'm seeing no other hands. No. Okay.
Can I just, sorry to be a pain.
Yeah, go on, Liz.
Yeah, this is just I've got a slight bee in my bonnet about something I'd like to see discussed at a future meeting, which is the cycle hire scheme, which seems to have been delayed, whereas we've been able to bring on stream the e-scooter trial, which is fine, but I'm just I want to see the bike hire scheme, so I'd like to know what.
So the next meeting of the subcommittee will be held on the 19th of October, and the committee are due to hold a Q&A session with the portfolio lead for transport, Councillor Ian Ward. So this is the committee's opportunity to hold Councillor Ward to account and put forward questions to him in respect to transport policy. So if members feel that we can also look at the Emergency Active Travel Fund as suggested by Councillor Clements earlier in the meeting. And then going over into next year, February, there'll also be a Q&A session with Councillor Kath Hartley in respect of delivery. So again, this is the committee's opportunity to forward questions in respect of the delivery of transport initiatives and schemes. And there'll also be a focus on the governance around the Commonwealth Games. And that's all I had to add on the programme, so happy to take any comments or items for future meetings.
I think it's worth just adding in, Lindsay, that we will be having a budget transport session with the Mayor as part of the main overview and scrutiny committee.
Yes, apologies, Chair. So in addition, the members of this committee will be invited to a Q&A session held with the Mayor. So this year there'll be 2 Q&A sessions, one on the 16th of October, and that will be in respect of the WMCA policies, and the other will be held on the 11th of December, and that will be based around the proposed budget. Members will also be invited to a workshop around the budget in which you'll receive detailed information line by line in respect to the budget to help you prepare for the actual Q&A session. So you should be receiving invites shortly to those 2 additional Q&As.
Thanks, Lindsay. So does anybody have any particular questions around the forward plan? No, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, perhaps we could just add in the extra bits that we've talked about today, Lindsay. So the issue around the emergency active travel fund, a briefing on that, please, and also the cycle hire. I guess the bit about the cycle hire is whether or not we put it into the Q&A with Ian Ward, or whether we reserve it for the Q&A with Kath Hartley, as it's a transport delivery initiative.